Hello there, Little Masters, and welcome once again to the Prancing Pony Podcast, where today we're setting off on the next stage of the quest, but not alone.
Indeed, our guest today saw our boat sliding down the bank all by itself and offered to come with us.
Maybe that analogy should go the other way around, Shawn. Maybe we're like Sam, drowning in the river, and she's pulled us out.
That's probably more like it. But
Yeah.
folks, go ahead and pull up a bench in the common room, and we'll be right there. I'm Shawn Marchese, the real-life Lord of the Mark, and I'm here with the Man of the West, Alan Sisto.
Thank you, Shawn. Folks, today we are so very excited to be welcoming Professor Verlyn Flieger back to the podcast. Dr. Flieger is Professor Emerita in the Department of English at the University of Maryland at College Park, and one of our absolute favorite guests we've ever had on the show.
And she's the author of numerous critical books on Tolkien's work, including Splintered Light, one of our all-time favorites, and one of our other favorite reference works this season, A Question of Time. She's also the co-editor of the journal Tolkien Studies and has edited several of Tolkien's own stories and essays for publication, including Smith of Wootton Major, another of my favorites, The Lay of Aotrou and Itroun, and The Story of Kullervo.
And she's a fiction writer whose new books, Arthurian Voices and Spiderweb Alley, will be out later this year. Now, at the risk of repeating myself, just a wonderful person to talk to. So, Dr. Verlyn Flieger, please, let me welcome you back to the Prancing Pony Podcast.
Thank you, gentlemen. It is a pleasure to be here.
Well, the pleasure is ours.
Truly a pleasure to have you.
Indeed. Well, it has been 2 years since we've had you on the show, and we cannot wait to hear what you've been up to. But first, we wanted to let you know we've been busy, too. The last time we had you on the show, we asked you about your essay, Eucatastrophe in the Dark, and the importance of reading Tolkien through the lens of two essays, on fairy stories, which we had covered, and Beowulf, the Monsters and the Critics. You called them the keys to mythology.
That's right. And at the time, we had looked at On Fairy Stories. We did that all the way back in season 1 in our first episode, but we hadn't looked at the Beowulf essay at all. So we followed your advice, and we went through that essay at the very beginning of season 3 before we started reading The Lord of the Rings. And I think I speak for both of us when I say that the Beowulf essay has really just opened our eyes to all sorts of themes in Lord of the Rings that I don't think we would have picked up on without it. So Thank you for that recommendation.
And while we've caught a lot of those on fairy story themes as well, things like eucatastrophe, recovery, escape, consolation, and so on, at times it seems like the Beowulf themes, the circle of light, the long defeat, are much more prominent. Now, at the risk of going back over some of the ground that we covered the last time you were on, how do you see the interplay between those two essays, particularly in the first volume, The Fellowship of the Ring? Is there a push and pull between the two, or maybe the story starts out darker and gets lighter, or vice versa? Or is there some other kind of balance between those two sets of themes?
Ooh, that's a good question. My impulse is to ask how long we have. In the first book, which is the more hobbity of the 3 volumes, and come on, let's not forget that Tolkien did not write 3 volumes.
That's correct.
He wrote a continuous story in 6 books.
Right.
Yes.
But certainly the Fellowship of the Ring is a lighter approach to the material, and in a sense is also the agent of that approach, because when Tolkien started, he wasn't writing The Lord of the Rings. He thought he was writing The New Hobbit.
Right.
And so he was doing his best to make the story as much like its predecessor, The Hobbit, as he could. But he found that, and anybody who's done any kind of writing for fun will know that this is true, that the story began to find its own headway, take its own direction, and for a lot of the time, he just followed it. And yes, it got darker and darker and darker.
Yeah.
There's a lot of jollity in the Fellowship. There's beer and cheese and mushrooms and hot baths and walking songs, lots of good stuff.
Yes.
But as soon as they go down that tunnel and through the gate, and Mary says, "There, you have left the Shire, and you are now in the old forest." Wow. The lights go down, the cellos start their number. And all of the cues are suggesting that the hobbits are kind of at sea in a world that they should have expected would be that bad because Fatty Bolger warned them, but they didn't.
True. No.
And what Tolkien has always said is that his image, his symbol for the other world, for fairy, is the forest.
Yes.
Right.
And as soon as they get there, they run into trouble.
Yes, they do.
And they start then on a sort of rhythmic pattern of pursuit, escape, refuge, calmness, pursuit, escape, refuge, calmness, with Tom Bombadil going to the Prancing Pony.
Yeah.
And on. So I think even in the first volume, we've got a lot more of that Beowulf essay than you might want to realize. And certainly the hobbits have left their circle of light.
Yeah, quite literally.
Of course, we find out when we get back at the end of the third volume that it wasn't all that light to begin with.
Right.
So there's a really marvelous interplay of the light and the dark, like shadows on a screen. They move in and out of each other.
Yeah.
Does that do to start?
That's fantastic.
Definitely. Yeah. That really is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love your observation about the sort of the cycle of pursuit and then escape and then refuge. And again, as we're recording this, we're just wrapping up the Lothlórien chapters, and that's exactly what we've just seen: pursuit through Moria, escape, back out into the light, technically, but not quite out of danger. And then it's not really until they get to Lothlórien that they find themselves getting a chance to rest. Again. And yet even there is peril. There's the peril that they brought with them. And there's the peril of fairy itself, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But yeah, that's it's a fascinating cycle that I don't think I've ever picked up on before.
Not to that extent, to realize that it's such a strong repeating cycle. But catching that, because you see it with the Old Forest and with Tom, and then you see it with the Barrow Downs, and then into the Prancing Pony, and you see it from there to Rivendell, and it's you're right. The more you see it, the more you see it.
And I think it'll be interesting as we continue to go through the book. And Dr. Flieger, I'd love your thoughts on this too. Does it escalate? Does the magnitude of the peril each time they find themselves in that pursuit phase, does the magnitude of peril get greater each time?
Absolutely. In the Old Forest, the hobbits are aware that the forest is out to get them, but Tolkien writes it from the hobbit point of view. He doesn't say the trees did this. He says, Pippin says the trees do this, or Frodo feels uneasy. Now remember that they have gone underground, and so many of these other worlds have a notion of the underworld as well, and that plays into Dr. Freud, the unconscious. So Tolkien, and remember it took him 12 years. But true. Tolkien is working with all of these strands of fairy tale and epic and psychology. The Old Forest episode is intensely psychological because it's all from the Hobbit's perception. When Frodo goes into the Barrow, he is in a sense going underground.
That's true.
He is in another underworld where, in a sense, he meets himself because he is tempted to escape. And he has to fight a battle with himself to stay and help his friends, which he wins and which he does. And then when you get to Weathertop, he really goes into the other world of the ring, because he puts it on and he can see the Nazgul, the Witch King, and the riders.
Mm-hmm.
So he is entering at that point, and by this time, Tolkien has gotten the feel of it, and he has the courage of his own imagination. So he's able to write a story in which Frodo goes into a kind of half world.
Mm.
I call it the world of the ring, but again, it's partly magical and partly psychological. He can see the dark,
Mm-hmm.
and the dark seems lighter to him than the light of every day.
Right.
And from then on, he is half in the ring world.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we can certainly see that escalating as as it goes too.
Jump to Moria.
Mm-hmm.
Jump to Moria. I'm skipping Rivendell, which is, everybody loves Rivendell. But there they literally go underground
Right.
into tunnels. And who should they pick up?
Yeah.
But Gollum.
That's right.
Frodo hears him.
Mm-hmm.
Sam hears him. The others not necessarily so much. So it's in that underworld where Frodo literally meets his dark self, which is Gollum.
Wow.
Right. Right.
So for me, and this is my reading, and not everybody will be comfortable with it, there's a steady but rhythmic progression from the circle of light into the very dark of the physical, emotional, psychological, Beowulfian underworld.
Yeah.
Boy, we're going to see some more themes next season, Shawn.
That is going to be
we got
so
more
fun
things
as we
to
continue.
look at.
Yeah,
More
absolutely.
lenses to look at things through.
The Beowulf essay is just so important.
It really
because
is.
it's the reverse of the fairy story essay. It's the absolute opposite pole.
It's the antithesis, like you've been, talking about for so long.
Right.
Yeah.
No happy ending. You're going to die.
Yep.
Right.
And it's going to be over. So deal with it.
That's right.
It's a bit of that
brutally practical, yes.
So, some of that grim Germanic humor that we talked about with Tom Shippey before, Alan.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's there, and Tom is right on the money with that.
He sure is.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about the other essay now, and of course, I mean on fairy stories. But I want to go first to one of your essays. It's called Tolkien on Tolkien, and it's published in Green Suns and Fairy.
Okay.
And in that essay, you make the case, which is actually something Tolkien himself said in his letters, that writing on fairy stories in between The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings sort of helped Tolkien get his ideas straightened out, get his ideas about fantasy, and that's what makes Lord of the Rings sort of a more effective work in that regard than The Hobbit. You actually compared the tra-la-la-lally song, the infamous tra-la-la-lally, to the Song of Nimrodel in Lord of the Rings as an example of the inner consistency of reality that the Lord of the Rings has and the Hobbit lacks, especially early on. Now, we talked about both of these poems this past season. Nimrodel, we just got to not long ago. We talked about Tra-la-la-lally earlier in the season. We had Corey Olson join us for the Council of Elrond. And
for one of our 5 episodes on the Council, but yes.
Yeah. Corey himself is a fan of Tra-la-la-lally.
I'll bet he is.
Dr. Flieger, I will leave you and Corey to debate that. But I do want to ask if, in addition to just Tolkien figuring out his ideas a little bit better, do you think that that cycle that we're talking about here, where the Beowulf stuff gets worked in and it gets progressively darker, does that add a kind of balance that also makes Lord of the Rings more successful?
A kind of balance. So you think it's sort of even Steven between eucatastrophe and the dark?
I don't know if it's even. I'm curious as to your
thoughts on that.
It's
more balanced than The Hobbit, I'm thinking. It seems like there's enough more. It's darker one way or the other, whether it's 55 or 60% dark or 80% dark. It's not The Hobbit.
Look, the Hobbit gets dark.
Yes, it does.
And that tra-la-la-lally is balanced not just by the Song of Nimrodel, but by a repeat of the same meter and the same subject matter at the end of that book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when they're on
Right.
their way back, right?
On
Mhm.
their way back, which
That's true.
is not tra-la-la-lally at all.
No, that is
Mhm.
true. It is not.
It's dark. The dragon is ended.
Mm-hmm.
So that Tolkien, see, I don't know how much of this was conscious.
Mhm.
It's always conscious when you rewrite.
Mhm.
True.
But while he was going forward, I think he was just moving into his own self in a way.
Mhm.
And of course,
Mm-hmm.
that second poem is much more moving
Yeah.
Yeah.
than the tra-la-la-lally. Those elves, those Rivendell elves are pretty silly. Don't get your beard wet.
Oh,
You
yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And he was talking to his kids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And by the time he's finishing it up, he's talking to C.S. Lewis.
Mm.
Oh, very true. Yeah.
Not that he isn't also talking to his kids, but the whole thing has moved from light to dark.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
He brings it back with the auction and
Yeah.
Right.
Bilbo repossessing Bag End and Gandalf saying you're just a little person after all.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think from the death of Thorin Oakenshield, which
Yeah.
I find very moving.
Very.
Deeply poignant. Yeah.
It's going in that direction. Now, The Hobbit was published in 1937. Things were getting dark
That is quite true.
That's a
in
good point.
Europe, even by
Mhm.
that time.
Yes, they were.
So we have to talk about balance. We have to balance what's going on in the story with what's going on inside Tolkien, with what's going on in the outside world.
Mhm.
True.
Yeah.
So The Hobbit, in a way, is a snapshot of what the Lord of the Rings will become. It's all there. It just
Mhm.
isn't fleshed out yet.
Right.
Tolkien hasn't fully realized the possibilities.
Mhm. That makes sense.
Yes, it does.
And I'm reminded, Alan, the times in which Tolkien lived. Dr. Flieger, you've done a really good job in most of your books that I can think of reminding us that Tolkien was a man of his time. And I think it's
Yes, he was.
because his work has a timelessness to it, and it's so medieval and philological in flavor, and yet is something that still speaks to us today in the 21st century. There is a timelessness to it, but he really was a man of his time, wasn't he? And
Yes, he was.
we need to keep that in mind.
Yeah. And, that famous line that we always reference when people try to read allegory into it about the purpose domination of the author and the whole,
Mhm.
cordial dislike of allegory. Right after that, he says something very important, that an author cannot, of course, remain wholly unaffected by his experience. It's
Right.
those real world experiences are going to shape what he writes, what he thinks, what he.
That's all there is.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
absolutely
that's
right.
true.
You can.
Yep.
It's the way that works with your imagination.
That's true.
Yeah.
Quite true.
All right. Well, I'll go ahead and move on to our next question here, Dr. Flieger, because we've just wrapped up Book 2 of The Lord of the Rings, which I think I've said a couple of times. And we've spent a lot of time talking about Lothlórien recently.
Yeah.
And I noticed from your work that you've spent a lot of time thinking about Lothlórien yourself.
Yes, I have.
Indeed.
So we hope you don't mind us asking you a few questions about it. Now, in A Question of Time, you write that Lórien is hard to pin down. And to me, Lórien seems to be a place as full of antitheses as Tolkien himself. It's the circle of light, it's surrounded by enemies, the Lord and Lady have fought the long defeat for ages, and yet at the same time it's also a fairy place. It's the heart of elvendom on Earth. Now, going back to something you say in A Question of Time, Lothlórien is both a real place on the map and it's an otherworld. It's both a place to rest and recover, and it's a perilous realm, as all fairy places are. And what I find most fascinating about it is that even for those of us who have read everything there is to read about elves in the Silmarillion and the history of Middle-earth, going into Morgoth's Ring and all that stuff, even if you know everything that there is published about elves, Lothlórien remains mysterious to us as readers. And I guess the last thing I noticed about Lothlórien, as I'm kind of putting all my thoughts out there, I noticed that it comes into the story at precisely the moment when Gandalf leaves it. And it almost seems to pick up in a way where Gandalf leaves off with the Fellowship. And so this is a big question, so I apologize in advance. But what do you see as the primary function of Lothlórien to the story?
Oh, does there have to be just one?
Oh, no. No,
I-
Your
I-
answer. You can give as many
you
as
can
you
give
want.
us a few, yeah.
Well, first of all, it's another one of those rest and rehabilitation pauses in the rhythm of the story. It's Tolkien's first big chance to bring in the elves.
Yeah.
He's gotten Gildor back in the Shire. He's got Glorfindel at the ford, but he hasn't really been able to. He's talked about the Silmarillion, or Aragorn has, but Tolkien hasn't brought it into the story in any living way until he gets to Lorien, and there's his chance. And he shows it to the reader through the eyes of the character most likely to be enchanted by it, and that is Sam. So much of the enchantment of Lorien, as I read it, comes through the eyes and the voice of Sam when Frodo says, "Well, you've been here for a while. What do you think of elves now?"
Right.
And he says, "Well, they seem a little bit more than I was ready for. They're so simple and so complex and so earthy and so ephemeral and a bit beyond my likes." So Sam is trying to capture and failing at what Tolkien says cannot be captured. Fairy cannot be caught in a net of words.
Right.
Says the fairy story essay. So then he picks Sam as the one who will attempt to catch fairy in a net of words, and by his failure, show us what it really is. And now, Tolkien couldn't have done any of that without Lorien.
True.
Right.
And as we know from who was it who said, "No, not another elf."
I know
that was Hugo
line.
Dyson, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
It was Dyson, right?
Yeah.
So the elves were more important to Tolkien than they were to many of his friends.
Yeah.
Yes,
and
they were.
Here's a chance for him to let himself off the leash and really write about them. And he develops them with Galadriel, who is one of his most ambiguous characters.
Yeah.
She certainly is.
And she comes in to the whole huge narrative in The Lord of the Rings, and then he writes her back into the rest of the story.
Right.
Problematically at many points, but yes.
Well, there's a line in the fairy story essay, and I cannot tell you what page it's on, but he talks about the fear of the beautiful fae that runs through so many fairy stories.
Yeah.
And you find it in fairy stories of his, Aotrou and Itroun, with the Corrigan.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't really want to reconcile all of these things and make them come out even.
No.
But I think that Galadriel is another place where Tolkien allowed his tendency toward the dark to get uppermost.
Yeah.
A lot of people are very suspicious of Galadriel. Boromir doesn't want to go there. Eomer says, "Oh, the Lady of the Golden Wood, she really exists, huh? We've heard about her." So she has a certain reputation.
She does indeed.
Yeah.
Even before they go in. And then Tolkien mixes that with her beauty and her kindness and Sam's adoration. She seems like a milkmaid, a Daffy Down Dilly, but there's more to her than meets the eye.
Right.
Yeah.
And then she becomes the embodiment of Lórien,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
which there is more than meets the eye.
Hmm.
And then Tolkien says, okay, say goodbye.
Yeah.
Now it's time to move on.
And there's that wonderful scene where they're on the river
Mm-hmm.
and she's on the shore,
Oh, yes.
but they see her moving backward.
Yes.
Yes.
And he's doing that thing that happens if you're in a railroad car next to another
Mm-hmm.
train.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And something starts moving and you look out the window and you think that you are moving, but it's the other train.
Right.
Right.
And
Mhm.
he's using that, I don't know what you would call it, confusion of the senses,
Yeah.
cognitive dissociation.
Kinetic confusion, maybe?
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
It even happens in a parking lot.
It does.
I'll be in a parking lot next to a car, and they start backing out, and I think I'm driving forward.
You got it.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
Tolkien puts all of that to work to
Yes, he
show
does.
us that the elves are leaving,
Yeah.
that the elves are fading,
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
and that Galadriel is moving backward.
Right. This isn't just the company
Wow.
leaving Lórien. This is the company leaving Lórien and Galadriel and Lórien leaving Middle-earth eventually.
Well, it's Lórien where Tolkien plays with time.
Yes.
Right.
Oh, and we've got some questions on that.
Okay, why don't you go ahead?
Well, actually, I want to start a little bit more about Galadriel.
Okay, sure.
We talked a little bit about her being so many different things, so many kind of sets of opposites, fair and comforting, beautiful and terrible. That moment in the Mirror of Galadriel when she talks about
All shall love me and despair.
right, all
Yes.
what an amazing line. And
Yeah.
you've called this an astonishing sentence in your essay, Fays,
think it
Gorgons,
is.
Elves, and More, and it is absolutely.
Yeah.
And that essay, folks, is in There Would Always Be a Fairy Tale, so track that down. But you also point out that it's not out of character, not if you've listened to Sam Gamgee and Boromir and Éomer and Wormtongue. And all of those, of course, are people who distrust the sorceress of the Golden Wood. Now, Galadriel herself tells us she's not a counselor. She says, "For not in doing or contriving, nor in choosing between this course and another can I avail, but only in knowing what was and is, and in part also what shall be." But aside from merely knowing, which I shouldn't even say merely, but aside from knowing itself, what is her role, especially when we view her in the long line of dark ladies in Tolkien's work, which go all the way back maybe to the Corrigan in Aotrou and Itroun?
Whew, what is her role?
Yeah, we kind of joked about it on the show. It's like, I'm not a counselor. Well, then what are you?
I remember
The
saying,
mirror's
yeah.
dangerous as a guide of deeds. Then why is it here?
There's a sentence that you read, one of her lines. She says, and I'll have to paraphrase it,
Sure.
but my function is not in choosing.
Right.
Okay, look at that word.
Mm.
She's an elf, and the elves are bound by the music.
Ah, wonderful
Oh,
way to
of
tie
course.
that back. And
Yeah.
wow. Yeah.
Whereas if you've read the Silmarillion, and of course, when we read The Lord of the Rings in 1956, we hadn't read the Silmarillion.
That's correct.
But in the Silmarillion, Aotrou says to the second comers, to the Atani,
Right.
I will give a choice. And the choice is to change the music.
Right.
So what she's saying is, it's up to you guys, your men.
That's right.
And when she silently interrogates each one of them, she looks into their eyes. Sam says, I felt like I didn't have no clothes on.
Mm-hmm.
But she is offering each of them a choice.
That is absolutely true. And folks, I want to actually bring us all the way back to that line from the Silmarillion. As she said, Iluvatar, so therefore he willed that the hearts of men should seek beyond the world and should find no rest therein, but they should have a virtue to shape their life amid the powers and chances of the world beyond the music of the Ainur, which is as fate to all things else, which would of course include Galadriel.
Yes.
And of their operation, everything should be in form and deed completed, and the world fulfilled unto the last and smallest.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great reminder of that distinction. It's something that we sometimes see, but I think right there, Shawn, am I not mistaken in saying that we didn't think of it from that perspective? That of course she's not going to be a chooser because for her, there really aren't a lot of choices to be made.
No.
No, I think that's absolutely right. And I think there's certainly a lot of interplay between free will and fate
Oh,
in the
yes.
whole episode, Mirror of
Yeah.
Galadriel and everything.
Yes.
But it's so hard to pin down. I think for us, honestly, Alan, I feel like it's always been hard to pin down the degree to which the elves do or do
Yeah.
not have free will.
Well, of course it is.
Yeah, it's supposed to be. But I'm glad we're
Tolkien-
struggling then.
Tolkien wasn't stupid.
No,
It was hard for him. It's hard for anybody to pin down. You
Yeah.
cannot choose when you're going to sneeze, but you can choose when you blow your nose.
There you go. Boy, that's
Well,
an
that's true. I
analogy.
guess it's hard to pin down for any of us. Yeah, of course.
Fate,
I'm not.
fate
I
and
think we
free
may just
will.
have the title of this episode, though, Shawn. I think we just heard the title. It's Tolkien Wasn't Stupid, an interview with Verlyn Flieger.
I like it. I like it.
Well, you
Oh,
know,
man.
he had this wonderful story
Yeah.
of creation by music.
Yes.
And then, as I imagine him, he realized that he had a closed system
Yeah.
and there was no room for improvisation. There was no room for suspense.
Mhm.
Everything was already laid out,
Mm-hmm.
which is pretty dull.
Yeah.
So, and Aotrou must have realized the same thing. And so he gave men free
Mhm.
will, which acts in Middle Earth kind of like providence.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's that unexpected, inexplicable, you never know quite where it comes from,
Mm-hmm.
but it changes the perspective.
Yeah, it does.
And once he had that, then he was free to go. So Sam has a choice, Boromir has a choice,
Yeah.
Frodo has a choice, Aragorn has a choice. I think we tend to kind of overlook the fact that he really is torn. Should he go with Frodo,
Oh,
or
yeah.
should he go to
Right.
Minas Tirith?
Right.
Yeah.
His original plans to go with Boromir. Now he's got to also
Yeah.
fulfill the role of Gandalf, and so he feels
Right.
like which is the right choice.
So
Mhm.
they're all there. Finally, when they leave Lorien
Yeah.
at the falls, they've all got those choices.
Boy, they sure do.
Yeah.
But not Legolas.
No, not Legolas. He's an elf.
That's
But
interesting.
Frodo has a choice on Amon
Mhm.
Hen.
Yeah.
He chooses to put on the ring
Yes, he does.
Mhm.
and chooses to take it
To
off.
take it off. Right. That's
Mhm.
exactly where my mind went next, is when he realizes the kind of danger he's in, and he hears Gandalf's voice basically telling him, take it off,
Fool!
you idiot.
Take
Yeah.
it off.
Yeah. Yeah.
Boromir has a choice.
Yes, he certainly
Yeah.
does. And then he has another choice.
Yes, good for you. He has another choice.
That's one of my favorite moments. I can't wait to start the following season and to get to that. And his repentance and his sacrifice at the beginning of
Yeah.
book 3 is one of my favorite moments in the entire Legendarium.
I think it's lovely.
It is.
Yeah.
I think it's
it is.
beautiful. I think it
Yeah.
was ruined by Peter Jackson.
Sadly, yes.
But that moment when he says to Frodo, to Aragorn, go to Minas Tirith and save my people, I have
Yeah.
failed.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And Aragorn says, few have won such a victory. But
That's
the
right.
victory is to realize that he has failed.
That's
Yes.
correct. And even Gandalf, who talks about it later when he talks about Boromir, that few have ever won such a battle, something along those lines.
Yeah.
He's praising the success of Boromir.
Mhm.
It's like, what? Boromir's dead. How did he succeed?
Right. You're thinking,
He
what
tried to take the
success?
ring.
Right.
How did he
Exactly.
succeed?
Right.
But he repented.
Right.
At the end, he recognized the error of it.
He not only repented, he confessed.
Exactly. He confessed,
Yeah.
and then he acted in accordance with that repentance by trying to
Yes.
save Merry and Pippin. He sacrificed himself. It's a beautiful story, and I don't mean to get distracted, but that's one of my favorite things. That's
Yeah.
We could go off on that because it's one of my favorites too. It's just
wow. Yeah.
a magical moment.
One of my themes, one of the things I see throughout the whole Legendarium, and this is totally off our list of questions, is this notion that every character who makes a bad choice always gets opportunities, usually multiple opportunities, to change their mind, to repent
Mhm.
and undo, or at least attempt to undo the wrong that they've done. And some characters do, and some characters don't.
Who do you see repenting?
Off the top of my head, obviously Boromir's the biggest one. Oh, goodness. You put me on the spot. It's been so long since I've addressed the theme that I don't have any of this at the top of my fingertips. We dive so deep into the current text that all I'm looking at is 8 pages a week.
Because I see it a little bit different. You're absolutely right. Tolkien gives people choices time and time and time again.
Yeah, Melkor, Sauron, Saruman, Gollum, they don't do it.
He gives the people who are capable of choice.
That is true.
Frodo, Sam, Aragorn. At the beginning of book 2.
Ah, yes.
Aragorn says, now may I make a right choice.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And change the fate of this unhappy day.
Mm-hmm.
So he knows what he's talking about.
He does.
And here's where Tolkien is so great. He doesn't know what choice to make, and Tolkien does not tell him.
No.
All of these people have to choose in the dark.
Yep.
They have to choose with not enough information.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't have to choose between good and evil, but between bad and worse.
Boy, is that the truth. And a lot of times, having more knowledge isn't helpful. I think of somebody like Denethor, who ends up gaining more information through the Palantir.
Oh, absolutely.
And it may not be inaccurate, but it lacks context.
Right.
Yeah.
And so he makes the wrong call even more wrong.
Yeah.
Yep. And contrast him with Sam at the pass. We're skipping way ahead now.
That's all right.
Yeah.
But at the end of book 2, when Sam and Frodo have been betrayed by Gollum, who also has a choice.
Yes, he does.
And almost makes the right one at one point.
Almost.
Good question. Does he or doesn't he? Don't answer. But when Sam thinks Frodo is dead, he sees him lying there, which he saw in the mirror.
Mm-hmm. We just saw that moment. That's
right. And Tolkien really puts him through it. He thinks he's got 4 or 5 choices. One is suicide.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And he really thinks about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he does.
Now, for a Catholic like Tolkien, for whom suicide is anathema, to have him allow Sam to think about that is part of the complexity of this complex author. But he says, okay, I could go back. No, I can't do that. I could kill Gollum. No, that doesn't seem pointless.
Doesn't really do much, right?
Right. Doesn't solve anything.
Well, maybe I should go on. Holy shit. Is that what I've got to do?
Yeah.
Go on. I'm not up to it. I can't do it. I'll be sure to screw it up.
Yes.
And he finally makes that choice, only to then find out, after he's taken the ring, that Frodo is alive.
Yeah.
That great last line.
Isn't it?
Frodo was alive, but taken by the enemy. And Sam says, I got it wrong. I knew I would.
Oh.
But did he?
But did he?
No, that's the thing.
But that's just it. Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's where Tolkien is just playing madly with the interplay of choice and fate and decision, and deliberately withholding the information that the character would need to judge what choice to make, and saying, no, you got to do it in the dark.
That's right. You got to make this decision entirely in a vacuum without almost any of the knowledge that you would need to make the right one. Yeah.
Yeah. And Aragorn says the same thing at the falls.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gimli says, I'll go with you. And Aragorn says, you've picked an ill chooser.
Right.
I don't know what I'm doing. And then, there's this wonderful sneaky sentence that Tolkien works in when they meet Éomer. And Éomer, what doom do you bring?
Yeah.
People out of the north. And Aragorn says, the doom of choice.
Ooh.
That's the line.
Doom is doom. There's no choice in doom.
Huh.
That's true.
It's done.
It's
Doom is what is
the
deemed.
decision.
Yeah, it's fated. Yeah.
It's a done deal.
Yeah.
So again, he's working both sides of the street at once.
Wow.
Mm.
While we're talking about fate and free will, because, no light discussions here at the Prancing Pony Podcast. We're going straight for the big questions. Let's talk about poor Sam, because he is just put through the ringer on making choices throughout the story. I mean, we saw him
Yes.
we saw him earlier in this season. We saw him faced with a choice of, going on and leaving Bill behind, or going back,
Yeah.
And we talked about it being a very wonderful emotional moment.
Childlike, and we talked
Yeah,
about the emotional
it's a beautiful
of
emotional
Sam.
moment. Yeah. And we talked about, his response there. But then you get something later on where he's faced with a very, very similar choice, but again, escalated to the nth degree.
Yeah.
Where he looks into the mirror of Galadriel and he has to sort of re-up his commitment to Frodo and to go on with the quest instead of going back to go save the Shire because he sees all this horrible stuff is going to happen. But at the same time, he sees this horrible stuff happening to Frodo in the future too.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he never seems to catch a break. He's forced to make these difficult choices throughout. As soon as he makes the decision to go with Frodo, and it's just the two of them, at that point, once Aragorn and Legolas and Gimli and Merry and Pippin, once they're left behind, their choice is made. They're not catching up to Frodo in any sense. But because Sam goes on with Frodo, he is constantly forced to make choices.
Yeah.
Yes.
Not that he's ever really seriously thinking about going back. It's not like the scene in the movie where Frodo says go back and he goes back.
Oh, goodness, no.
But the insertion of Gollum into that dynamic forces Sam to constantly make choices about
every day.
What is going to be best for Frodo, what's going to be best for the quest. And I don't even know that I really have a question there, except that, my gosh, poor Sam.
Yeah. and maybe in some ways he's the least equipped of the original company to make those big decisions. I mean, that's how Tolkien frames him, as certainly the least educated and the most basic of the hobbits. And so you think, well, maybe he's not, I don't want to say this, but he's not as smart. But the truth is, he's got a lot of wisdom that's hidden.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, don't look at Sam, look at Tolkien.
Yeah.
Because Tolkien is creating and controlling Sam. Why does Tolkien create this character? Why does he choose him to make the choices?
That's a good question.
And in the scene with Bill, which I had completely forgotten, and you're absolutely right, it's sort of in miniature what he has to do with Frodo. He says, I had to do it, Mr. Frodo.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I had to leave him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Talk about interplay of two essays. There's so much interplay of fate and free will.
Mm-hmm.
As the story goes on, there's more and more and more, because you can kind of see Tolkien saying, yeah, this is the way it is.
Mm-hmm.
You never know all that you should know. And you have to go on anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't control the outcome of your choice.
True.
And of course, Sam at the pass is the most wonderful example of that, because if he hadn't taken the ring, the orcs would have gotten it.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
The right choice looked like the wrong choice for a while.
Oh, that's a good
there
way to
you
put
go.
It. Yeah.
Yeah. And as we're talking about all of this, again, because I'm thinking of the mirror and Sam sort of watching helplessly as these horrible things happen in the Shire, but he doesn't know. Have they happened yet? Are they going to happen? And it's that Oedipus question, which we talked about when we talked about it on the show. Is he going to make it happen by turning aside to prevent it? And I can't help but think about another Tolkien character who's forced to watch helplessly as horrible things happen, and that's Túrin.
Yeah.
And
yes,
not that he ever really has a chance to do anything about it.
No,
but
quite the opposite.
That's true. But again, it illustrates to me how much Tolkien was interested in this concept of the struggle between fate and free will, because that is all throughout that story of the Children of Húrin.
all
and
throughout.
and that was one of the big
is it
questions that we
ever?
struggled with. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I can't wait to spend more time on that. I think the 3 episodes we did that on in season 1 are a pittance compared to what we'll do when we finally get through it again when we get to it one more
I
time.
don't think 9 hours was enough to cover it, and it
No,
was
I think we'll need, a good 8 to 10 episodes of 2 hours each to cover that one
Yeah.
properly.
and I'm curious to what degree, does is Túrin is another character who's constantly forced to make these choices, isn't he? And he does
No,
not
Uh-oh.
at all.
Now it's your turn, Shawn.
no, he's not forced to make choices. He makes choices,
Okay. Yep.
Right.
and they are 9 times out of 9
The wrong one.
Yes, that is
the
correct.
wrong choices.
Yes, they are.
Túrin
That's fair, yeah.
chooses over and over and over.
Mhm.
He changes his name. He does this.
Yeah.
He does that.
Yeah.
I find Túrin fascinating for what he can tell us about Tolkien.
Mm.
That Tolkien was so drawn to this character
Yeah.
because he comes right out of Kalevala.
Right.
Mhm.
He's
Right.
modeled on Kullervo.
Mhm.
And there's something about that headlong rush to
Yeah.
self-destruction
Yeah.
that
Right.
that really engaged Tolkien.
Sure did. Clearly.
Yeah. Well, he gave Túrin his name, didn't he? He had Glaurung call him Captain Foolhardy.
And he is.
Yeah.
But you know what? He loves him.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I love him.
Yeah. If it weren't for him and even the foolish decisions he made, there are things that came out from that, as we always see. What we call spabimi, shall prove but mine instrument, right? That eventually Iluvatar's will is going to be accomplished even when people do stupid things. And you think of some of the events that came about as a result of the actions of Túrin. They were all terrible at first.
Well, pretty hard on Finduilas.
Well, yeah, we've
Yeah.
talked about that. Poor gal still just kind of hanging around.
Also Mablung.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It isn't just stick around, fellas. Everything's going to turn out all right in
Oh,
the
no,
end.
not at all. Not
Right.
at all.
Because it doesn't.
Mhm.
No. Destruction of entire
Beleg
realms.
and
thanks to
Brandir
him.
and the
And
long line of
people's
bodies.
lives.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Look at Frodo,
Yeah.
whose life is ruined
Yeah.
Yeah.
because he made that choice back at Rivendell.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah, I do look forward to going back over the story of Túrin someday, because there's just, despite all the bad choices that he makes, and and as you say, Alan, good does come out of his choices, because that tends to be the way Tolkien's world works. But
True.
even along the way, there's just something I love about the guy.
Hard
I
not
don't
to.
know.
You root for him even though
You
know
root
he's going
for
to
him.
still make the wrong
You
call.
do. You absolutely do. You root for him even though he's going to make the wrong call. And every time you go back and reread that story, you think, maybe this time he'll say, "Who is it?" before he stabs
Exactly.
Beleg.
Yes. Yes, you do. Maybe this time he'll get it right.
Yeah.
He never does, but you keep reading it just in case. Yeah.
Túrin is lovable.
Yeah,
He is.
Beleg loves him.
Oh,
Yeah.
deeply. Oh, the tale of Beleg just breaks my heart every time. Yeah.
A lot of people love him.
Mhm.
So he must have something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But as a character, I think he's one of the most interesting and complex
Oh, deeply.
that Tolkien ever created. He
Mhm.
is so much more interesting than Beren,
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
who
No
is
doubt about
kind of a Barbie doll. He's just
To Luthien's Ken.
I'm not going to go there.
No, I'm wise.
Well, or Tuor. I love Tuor, but
Or Tuor, yes.
but he's just not nearly as complex a character.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, no, Tolkien's epic hero is really Túrin.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, no doubt. I want to talk about your new book, Arthurian Voices, due out this year from the Gabbrohead Press. It contains 2 major works of Arthurian fiction that you wrote. And please forgive me if I don't get the name of this first one pronounced correctly. Is it Avilion?
That's exactly right.
Woo! Every once in a while.
All right,
Blind
good
squirrel
job.
finds a nut sometimes. Avilion, A Romance of Voices, and The Bargain, A Comedy of Voices. Can you tell us a little bit, and our listeners, about these works and their publication later this year?
Well, I'm delighted at their publication and very grateful to Gabriel Press for selecting it. They were scheduled to come out, I think, in June, or the whole volume, at Corey Olsen's Mythmoot.
Okay.
Which sadly has been postponed.
I know.
And I think is now scheduled for
August, I believe, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Are you guys going to be there?
We would like to. Yeah, there's so much up in the air right now. It's hard to say.
I know. Well, there is in all of life. Who knows whether, we'll eat dinner tonight.
Yeah, true. But yes, we would like to be there.
And my publisher, Paul Thomas, who's the head of Gabriel Press, was going to do a book launch and have a signing and, all of the paraphernalia. But we also planned that there would be a reading of The Bargain.
Oh.
Which I do hope we'll get to do, because it's always gratifying to see your work come alive.
Yeah.
And The Bargain is, they're both in the title, they have the word voices, Avilion.
Right.
A Romance of Voices. And that is, just to start at the beginning with it, that is a series of soliloquies by the characters in the Arthurian story, telling the story from their own perspective. So it's like a lot of angle shots that need to be put together to comprise the story that we all know.
Mm-hmm.
But I hope that it would remind people that everybody has a story. And that just because your story gets mixed in with somebody else's doesn't mean that your part in it isn't essential to you. See, old Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead. They, poor guys, they didn't know it, but they were in Hamlet's story and they thought they were in their own.
Right.
Until the very end.
Right.
So I wanted all of the characters to be able to speak in their own voices. And I had a wonderful time doing it because I got to listen to them.
Get to spend some time with the bit players, huh?
Yes, I got to hear what they had to say. It started around midnight one night when I was asleep, and I woke up because I heard Sir Bedivere. And he said, "How was I supposed to know?" Now, if you remember Sir Bedivere, he's the guy at the very end of the story that Arthur says, "Take the sword and throw it in the lake."
Right.
Yeah.
And I suddenly imagined Bedivere on a talk show. and talking to some talk show host and saying, was I supposed to know what was going to happen? I mean, he didn't tell me anything. And he talked on and on in my head. I finally had to get up and go into my study and start to write him.
Wow.
But he was a wonderful character. And he led me through the whole end of the story. In the book, he closes, or almost closes, the Avilion portion of it. And yet he was the first one that I heard. And then I started to hear the others. I started to hear Sir Kay. I started to hear Arthur, who said, "You think it's fun being told you're not who you thought you were?" No, it's not fun at all. So I had a wonderful time just putting that together. And there it lay for many years until Paul Thomas offered to publish it.
That's wonderful. I can't wait to read it.
I'm looking forward to reading this. It's going to be fun.
If we have time, I could read part of it for you.
Shawn, I've got no problem with that.
I would love that. Absolutely love it.
Yeah, I think our listeners would absolutely enjoy it. Please do.
Right at the end, would that be okay?
Yeah.
Sure,
I think
absolutely.
so, unless it spoils the story for everybody, but that's your call.
Well, but the point of this story is everybody knows how it comes out.
Right.
That's
Everybody
true.
knows how the
That is
Arthurian
true.
story ends. Yeah.
Everybody
That is a good point.
retells it
Yeah.
for his own time. Tennyson did. Mallory did brilliantly. T.H. White did. So there's something about it that keeps bringing
Yeah.
people back to it.
Yeah.
And you said it actually about Túrin maybe 10 minutes ago. You said maybe this time he'll get it right.
Yeah.
Well, to me, that's the strength of the Arthurian story. That you think maybe this time they'll do it right. And they never do.
Right.
No.
But there's always that possibility because maybe he'll come back.
Right.
And this is the strongest story I know of that holds out that kind of hope.
Well, then please read away.
Absolutely.
Our listeners are going to love this. What a surprise.
Okay, well, I'm going to start with my favorite, the man I woke up in bed with.
Maybe there's our title, Shawn. No, I'm kidding.
And that's Bedivere.
All right.
Right.
How was I supposed to know? He didn't tell me what to expect. I don't suppose I would have believed him, even if he had. In any case, he didn't. He just gave me the order. An order so insane, I knew he was off his head. I had suspected that anyway. He was fey, death ready. You could see it. His eyes had that look you get to know when a man has got his death wound but doesn't know it yet, staring without seeing, as if he's in some other place. But off his head or not, the man was dying, and you don't say no to a dying man. Certainly not to that dying man. So I wasn't about to argue. Take the sword, he said. His voice was so faint I could hardly hear him. I unbuckled the sword belt and eased it out from under him and drew the sword halfway out of its sheath. Stained and clotted with blood as it was still a beautiful thing. The grip was wound with silver wire, and there was a great red gem mounted in the pommel. The hilts were enameled and set with garnet and lapis, and the blade was etched with running stags. The belt was embossed leather, gold stamped. He saw me staring at it. He was near to fainting, but he kept his eyes on me. All right, I said, I've got it. What do you want me to do? Throw it in the water, he said. I stared at him. I don't know what I expected, but it wasn't that. I must have looked foolish, for he gave a little bitter half smile and said again, but weaker this time, throw it in the water. I nodded. Right, I said. He was out of his head. He didn't know what he was saying. I took the sword and went down to the water's edge. He couldn't see me. God help me, I couldn't just throw away that sword. I mean, everything would have gone with it. It was him. It was his kingship, his power, all that he stood for. The shore was thick with reeds. I nested the sword deep in the rank growth where no one would be likely to find it till I could come back and retrieve it. I went back to the king. His eyes were closed. I thought he was gone. But he opened them and said, what did you see? See? What was there to see? Just the water lapping against the reeds, I said. He started up from the earth and his eyes went through me like steel. Go back, he said, and throw it in the water. I didn't know what to do then. He was dying. I owed it to him. I went back. I really meant to throw it this time. I swear I did. But at the last, I couldn't do it. Maybe he'll be unconscious, I thought, as I walked back, and I won't have to tell him. I was so weak myself, I could barely stand by that time. He was awake. What did you see? Same question, same answer. Just the waves in the reeds, I said. Be easy. There's nothing to see. Nothing more can happen. He cursed me then. Cursed me for a traitor and an untrue knight. He was weeping with rage. How could I, who had been so close to him, be so false to his last command? I went back again. Third time pays for all. I wrapped the belt around the hilts and threw the sword as hard as I could, as far as I could, and waited to see it cleave the water and disappear. It lofted so slowly, end over end. There was plenty of time as it fell for the arm to come up out of the water, the white sleeve fallen back from the wrist. The hand caught the sword by the pommel as it neared the water and brandished it 3 times. Then it sank beneath the water again, and the sword with it. There was a little sound and a ripple as when a fish jumps, and the circle spread across the water, washing finally against the reeds where I stood. I went back and told him, and he sighed and closed his eyes. The life was nearly gone from him. There's little more to tell. The barge came, and I waited, carrying him out to where it waited. And the 3 women took him on board, and it left. I called to him over the water, and he tried to answer. I think it was to tell me where he was going, but his voice was too weak to carry, and I didn't hear what he said. It was only then that I realized what had happened that day.
Wow.
Wow.
Wow. That was really
Thank
neat.
you.
I can't wait to read
Thank
this.
you. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thanks for letting me read it. Thank Bedivere. He said it.
Yes,
He
definitely.
said it. I didn't.
Thanks for showing up, Bedivere.
You know, I have to say that I haven't read all the Arthurian material that's out there. I've read a few things. Bedivere, maybe not one of the top 5 best known characters in that story.
No.
No.
But he ends it.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, he has the spot next to closing in the vaudeville show.
Mm-hmm.
That's always what you
Yeah.
want.
Right. Yeah.
True.
Fortunately or unfortunately, I think the first thing I think of with Bedivere is I think of Terry Jones.
Oh, well,
Oh, dear.
yeah.
Oh dear. Oh well.
Yeah.
But there's so much
That
more there.
sadly is.
And what I love about the passage you just read for us is it brings 2 characters to life. It brings Bedivere to life,
Mhm.
and it brings Arthur to life. And Alan, I'm reminded of the conversation we had not long ago when we talked about Frodo remembering Gandalf and the
Oh, yeah.
poem that he spontaneously recites, or
Mhm.
it comes to him and then he can't quite remember all of it, and so we get a piece of it.
Right.
And there's in Frodo's remembrance of Gandalf, we get the myth, right? We see all the great things he did,
Mhm.
but then there's also a touch of just the simple person too, the man behind the myth.
Mhm.
And I get a strong sense of that here. We get the man behind the myth of Arthur through Bedivere's recollection, and I really do love that.
Yeah.
And again, just thank you for sharing it.
Thanks for letting me. It was a pleasure.
And so that one was from Avilion, correct? A
Yeah.
Romance of Voices.
Yeah.
Well, tell us about the other one, the Bargain. Is there a thematic difference between these 2 works? I notice one is a romance of voices, the other's a comedy of voices.
Well, there's a difference because there's a difference in tone.
Mm-hmm.
The story of Arthur, and my go-to guy for Arthur is Sir Thomas Malory. And Malory was writing a tragedy, a very powerful one. But in the ancient Greek theater, when you had a tragedy, it was very often followed by what they called a satyr play,
Mm-hmm.
a shorter
Mm-hmm.
comedy
Right.
to sort of cleanse the palate,
Yeah. Sends you home on a higher
to
note,
send
right?
you home not just purged, as Aristotle says, but better for it.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so the bargain is, I hope, there to function as, in that respect, to a Villian. It's the lighter side.
Hmm.
And my text for that was Sir Gawain and the Green Knight,
Ah,
which is one of the great Arthurian poems,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
and very funny and very bawdy.
Yeah.
Yeah, very. That is true.
And I started to hear Arthur and Gawain talking, and I knew that the Green Knight was listening.
Ah,
And that's what made it fun to hear what they had to say. So I started with the banquet, and I just retold in dialogue form. It is a play for voices, a comedy for
Mhm.
voices,
Mm-hmm.
the story of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. And I'm very much hoping that we'll get a chance to do a reading of it. It would be hard to stage because, I mean, the Green Knight
Yeah.
is, you know, the size of a tree.
Right.
But if you just have people read it, then
Right,
the
like a
audience
radio.
can use their own imagination, just like radio, which is a
Mhm.
great medium, believe me.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Then we could have the whole setup, the Green Knight riding into Arthur's court, and Sir Gawain taking the bet
Mhm.
and chopping off the Green Knight's head, only to find that it keeps on talking,
Mm-hmm.
and then riding through the woods in the winter on his way to the Green Chapel,
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
and then, you know, finding Lord Bersilac, who is,
Right.
as he doesn't know, really the Green Knight,
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
and being entertained by Lady Bersilac, who
Mhm.
visits him in his bedroom.
Mhm.
And I had a lot of fun with that.
I can imagine. I'm afraid we probably would too.
There's a wonderful illustration in the actual manuscript, which is in the British Library and used to be on display. As you know, it has 4 color illustrations, but one of them is the lady standing by Sir Gawain's bed, and he is cowering. He's got the covers up over his nose, and he's looking as scared as a rabbit. And I thought that was pretty funny myself.
That is pretty funny.
So
Yeah.
I wanted to write about it. I don't know who's going to play the characters, but I'm very hopeful that we can get a reading out of it.
That would be fun.
That sounds fantastic.
Was that manuscript, was that the, remember when we talked about that library, Shawn, that I can't remember the name of it now, that burned?
Oh,
had-
yes.
At Ashburnham House.
Yes,
Yes.
right. And I remember
Yeah.
even had the word burn in the name of the thing.
Ashburnham,
Was that the
yeah.
one? Because I know that there were several manuscripts. Yeah, several manuscripts that had been saved from that.
Yeah.
One was Beowulf. I think
That's right.
Sir Gawain was there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just wasn't sure when you talked about the manuscript that was on display, whether that was the one that we had mentioned as one of the ones that
Right.
had been saved from Ashburnham House.
Oh, you got me right now. I would have to go back just to
Yeah, I
make
don't know.
sure. I know
Yeah,
the Beowulf manuscript was damaged.
Yes,
Right.
it was damaged.
Right.
First scorched along the edges,
Mm-hmm.
and then water damage. You know, it's
Right, when they were putting the fire out. Yeah,
amazing that it actually survived.
it really is.
Yeah.
I know. We did a pretty long sidebar in that one. I don't remember what what the context of the sidebar was, Shawn, but I remember we went in depth because, of course, both of us being book lovers were just mortified by
Yeah.
this idea of all these amazing manuscripts going, you know, so many of them going up in smoke.
Well, that's the fate of libraries.
It
Yes.
is.
All the
It
way
is.
back
It is.
to the library at Alexandria.
Alexandria.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And
Yeah.
the
Absolutely.
library at Monte Cassino,
Mm-hmm.
which
That's
was
right.
destroyed in World War II by us,
Yeah.
Right.
by the good guys.
Mm-hmm.
The printed word is very fragile.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Well, Dr. Flieger, I think I speak for both of us when I say we're both really excited about the new book and looking forward to reading
Oh,
it.
yes. Mm-hmm.
And I do think it's something that we're hoping to be able to bring into the show from time to time too, because even though when we first started the podcast, we kind of made a point not to look too closely at the bones of the soup.
Yeah, we've changed that.
4 years later, I think we're breaking that rule every week.
Rules are meant to be broken.
I think I'm breaking it a little more than you are, Alan. What do you think?
Yeah, maybe. I'm not opposed to breaking it, but I think you just look for the opportunity.
I just naturally break that rule all the time.
Yeah.
And I have to say, one of Tolkien's influences that we haven't spent too much time on is the Arthurian material. I mean, we've talked a fair bit about Sir Gawain, of course, because he translated it. And we had Serena Higgins on last season. She talked about her book, The Inklings and King Arthur. We talked a little bit about the Tolkien's own poem, The Fall of Arthur there.
Right.
And we even got a little bit about the sheath, Excalibur's sheath, a few episodes ago. But it's just something we haven't gone back to often. And I wonder if, Alan, if maybe we've taken his objections from letter 131 too seriously. You know, the whole idea that it's too British, it's not English enough.
Right.
But Dr. Flieger, what would you say is the influence of the Arthurian tradition on Tolkien? I have a feeling that it's probably a bigger influence than many people realize. But, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's hard to know where to start. I think for any educated or even uneducated Englishman of Tolkien's time, Arthur is just a continuing presence.
Mm-hmm.
Beowulf is a special study. Not all schoolboys read Beowulf, but they all have some knowledge of the Arthurian story. In folklore, they've read Tennyson, maybe they've read Malory. A lot of them have read T.H. White. I'm pretty sure that Tolkien had. So Arthur is just part of the scenery.
Yeah.
For any English person, and especially one who is interested in myth.
Yeah, that makes sense.
In that terrific long letter that he wrote to Milton Waldman when he was trying to get The Lord of the Rings published, Tolkien talked about the ending of The Lord of the Rings, Frodo's departure overseas, as an Arthurian ending.
Yes.
Right.
Well, you can't get plainer than that.
No, you can't.
If he was envisioning Frodo's departure from the Grey Havens overseas to Valinor as, in a sense, in the spirit of Arthur's departure to be healed, he is bringing one very great story into the service of another. So that when you read The Lord of the Rings and you get to those moments at the end of it with the departure of Frodo, then the departure of Arthur is in your head and you see the one in the context of the other. And if Tolkien is lucky, you see the other in the context of the one. You see Arthur in the context of Frodo as well as Frodo in the context of Arthur. But that's kind of a tragic ending. It's open-ended.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I don't have the page numbers to give you here, but I think that early drafts of Valinor called it Avalon.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah,
Shawn, remember we talked about some of those early works?
I do remember. I know there's the bit at the end of the Silmarillion where the haven at Tolleresia is called Avalone.
Yeah, Avalone.
Yeah.
So I think now by the time he wrote the Waldman letter, this was 1951. So The Lord of the Rings was pretty much finished. The Silmarillion had been set aside. A lot of other things had interposed themselves in between. But Tolkien still somehow had Arthur in the back of his consciousness. When he talks about the Arthurian world, he doesn't mention any authors.
No, you're right.
He just says its fairy is too extravagant. It's over the top.
Mhm.
I think he's talking there largely about the French romances,
Mhm.
about Chrétien de Troyes
Mm.
and Marie de France, where the fairy is certainly over the top.
Mm.
Anything goes. Knights fight giants. A lot of it is done with tongue in cheek. One of the knights, I think Sir Yvain, goes from one amazing adventure to another. He fights giants, he rescues damsels, and he meets a damsel who says, and I'm going to mess this up because I haven't taught Yvain for a long time, but he meets a damsel who says, I'm going to get burned at the stake. Can you help? And he says, well, yeah, what time? Because I've got to kill a giant first, and I don't know.
Let me pencil this into my schedule.
Yeah, it's very,
Yeah.
very funny. And it's
Yeah, it is.
satirical. The knights are being made fun of.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that a lot of that is what Tolkien had in the back of his mind.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. When he criticized it as being over the top like that, right?
And like a stained glass window broken.
Mm-hmm.
But he certainly was thinking of one of the more serious romances, the Lancelot.
Yeah.
When he wrote his own Arthurian story, because his Guinevere is an amazing creation in that tradition.
Mm.
She's always the fall guy for the story.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Tennyson doesn't like her at all, but he never makes her evil. He just
Right.
makes her foolish.
Mm.
Uh-huh.
Tolkien called her a fey woman.
Right.
Yeah.
Fair as fey woman in the world, walking for the woe of men.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
And she is in the tradition of Galadriel,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
who is a fey woman to Éomer and to Boromir, in the tradition of the Corrigan in Aotrou and Itroun, who is the witch in the wood,
Mm-hmm.
which, by the way, is the title of one of the 4 volumes of T.H. White's The Sword and the Stone, The Once and Future King.
Uh-huh.
The
Right.
first volume is The Sword and the Stone. I think the second is The Witch in the Wood. And then The Queen of Air and Darkness, and then The Morte Arthur. But Tolkien's Guinevere is a departure from the tradition.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And he makes her such a vivid character. He must have been a little in love with her, I've always thought.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She certainly dominates his Arthurian story in many ways.
Yeah.
And then at the very end of the written parts of the fall of Arthur, not the death of Arthur, by the way, the fall of Arthur.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Tolkien had his Lancelot follow Arthur into the West.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
As Frodo and Bilbo go into the West.
Mm-hmm.
There's just such a powerful gesture.
Yeah.
That unites the 2 mythologies.
Yeah.
I find them to be, in a sense, kind of a pair.
Every time I read The Fall of Arthur, I just that is one of his unfinished works that I'm just so sad that's not finished.
That it's unfinished. I know.
Yeah. And yet, if he had finished it, where was it going?
Yeah.
Mm.
If Lancelot followed Arthur into the West, would it have wound up attached to Tolkien's own mythology?
Right.
Mm.
Yeah, because I remember there's a fair bit of Eärendil stuff in the appendix
Eärendil
to that.
passage, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So at some point, this took 20, 30 years. He was writing away at this. But at some point, he did consider some kind of a connection
Mm-hmm.
between existing English mythology, British mythology, and his
Right.
own.
Yeah.
Or he wouldn't have made that note.
True.
Right.
If you think about it, it's a huge undertaking to try to supply the English with a lost mythology. Only a very young man would have dreamed of trying to do that.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
true. That is a young man's dream, no doubt about it.
And it was as a young man that Tolkien began with it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
of course, as Christopher Tolkien has shown us, he began it with the sack of a city. So even at the beginning, in his own mind, it was not going to be a happy mythology.
No.
Wow.
But you can see him kind of sitting and thinking to himself, okay, England used to have fairies, not airy fairy, little butterflies, but real fairies like the Irish tuatha, tall, beautiful. They're not here anymore. Where did they go? Why did they go? And beginning to evolve his own notion of the elves leaving Middle-earth. Sam says at the very beginning, they are sailing, sailing over the sea.
Right.
Yep.
So his whole mythology is, in a sense, a justification for the fact that they're gone.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's one way to look at it.
Well, and as you talk about beginning the mythology with the sack of a city, I'm thinking about, I can't remember which medieval Arthurian work it is. I'm going to try and look it up. But there's one or two medieval Arthurian works that actually begin with the sack of Troy, don't they? And actually make Arthur a successor to the ancient Greek tradition of the Trojan War.
Well, that's the whole British mythology, that the escapees from the Trojan War came to England and settled in.
Yeah.
Right.
And became the indigenous founders of the mythology.
Right.
Yeah, I hope you can find out which text that is, because I can't remember it either.
Is it? I think it might be, and I can never say this person's name. Lagamon's Brute.
Lagamon, the Brute, yes, because it's Brutus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Of course,
Well,
Brutus.
that middle letter is a yoch.
Right.
And a yoch is very hard to say. It's like a 3 written below the line, but it's one of those back of the throat gutturals
right.
that are so hard for the English to pronounce. Lagamon.
I heard Nelson Gehring give a talk on the Brute at Tolkien 2019, and he talked about the yoke.
Yeah.
And I said to myself, I'm never going to try and get it right, because he gets it right. I'll never get it right like that.
Well, he's very good, Nelson Gehring.
Yes, he is.
He is.
He's first rate. Yeah.
Phenomenal. Yeah. I know. You know what I call those letters? Ones that Shawn does on the show. It doesn't even matter which one it is. That's just the one that Shawn does. It's the same thing I do with a lot of the Middle English, or not of the Middle English so much, but the Old English for sure. I know my strengths, and that's not one of them.
Better to know your weaknesses.
It's a strength to know your weaknesses. That is true.
There you go.
Now, not long ago in one of our postscripts, we talked about Bilbo thrusting Sting into the wooden beam in The Ring Goes South, and Frodo's acceptance of Sting as echoing Arthur's withdrawal of the sword from the stone. Now, you mentioned this in your book, Interrupted Music. We know that Tolkien was moved by the theme of the ennoblement of the ignoble. We see that all throughout The Lord of the Rings. Do you find this to be a common theme in the Arthurian legends like it is in Tolkien?
I don't know who the ignoble are. Are you saying Bilbo is ignoble?
I don't know. I mean,
Shawn, help me out here.
I always felt like Tolkien, when Tolkien talked about I don't know that he ever said that any of the characters were ignoble, did he? I mean, he said that the idea of the ennoblement of the ignoble moves me, I think is the way he put it in one of his letters. And I think he said that in reference to hobbits, but it's a fair point that the hobbits have a pure kind of nobility in them from the start, don't they?
Yeah, unless you're just talking about birth. I don't know. By the way, I got to give credit where it's due. That insight about Frodo pulling Sting out of the beam, that was given to me by one of my students.
Mm.
Oh, wow.
That was a moment in class, and I thought, wow, you are absolutely right. And it's just tucked away there so that anybody who wants to look for it can find it. But I didn't see it. It was an undergraduate
Wow.
who pointed that out to me, and I thought it was terrific.
That is. When we recognized that, it was one of those moments just like you described it as, oh, how did I miss that?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, but you missed it because Tolkien buries it.
He does.
He doesn't.
A lot of these are blink and you miss it moments. They really are.
He doesn't say Frodo pulled it out.
No.
He says Frodo accepted it gratefully.
Yeah.
But the only way he can do that is to pull it out.
Pull it out of the beam. That's right.
But Tolkien slides these things in
yeah.
when you're not looking. And if you're not really careful, you're going to have to depend on your students to explain things to you.
Well, we do that all the time. Our listeners constantly update us on what we missed.
Finding stuff that we don't find. But I love that use of that word accepted, because not only does it hide the reference a little bit, but it also gives it so much more meaning, doesn't it? Because he's not just taking the sword. He's accepting the responsibility of the quest in a certain sense.
Exactly. It's in miniature, it's kind of like I will take the ring.
Mm-hmm.
It really is, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's one of those moments. And if we can loop all the way back just for a minute, is that okay?
Of course.
Always okay.
To the Silmarillion and the Lord of the Rings. We talked about the music. We talked about Eru Ilúvatar giving men free will. He doesn't call it that. He says the virtue to shape the music. But in one of the earlier versions of that same incident, that same passage that's in the Book of Lost Tales, I think it's in Book of Lost Tales 1, there's an earlier writing of that in which Eru says, I will give men free will.
Yeah.
I mean, he comes right out and says it. And he says to the Atani, that is men, the second comers,
right,
I will appoint a task. And the task is to have free will. And at Rivendell, when Frodo says, I will take the ring, Elrond says it's a heavy burden. I do not,
yeah, I do not lay it on
nobody
you.
could lay it on another. But if you take it, I will say that your choice is right.
Yeah.
And that this,
I love that moment.
And that this is a task appointed for you. It's those same two words.
Yeah.
That Eru uses, that Elrond uses.
The task and the choice.
The task appointed.
Yeah.
Right.
For Frodo.
Yeah. And yet he still has to choose it. I remember we spent quite a bit of time kind of talking about that, this notion of
a
task being appointed. Yeah, it's hard not to.
It is. Yeah.
I would have liked to have spent even more time, but when you're going to blow through the Council of Elrond in only 5 hour-and-a-half-long episodes, you can't take too long.
Come on, guys. That's worth a whole year.
I know.
Well, then we'd just be exploring the Lord of the Rings with two different guys not named Corey. And so we figured we'd do a slightly different format.
That's interesting. Isn't it Tom Shippey who pointed out years ago that there are 11 voices at the Council of Elrond?
He did count the number. He talked about the actual voices, but then also the number of characters represented.
Who are quoted,
Who are quoted, right. Gandalf quotes so many, for instance, and others quote other characters. That there's something overall, there's over 20 total characters who speak, many of whom are speaking through the quotes of actual people.
Other voices. Yeah.
It's incredible.
It's an amazing piece of writing. He was good, Tolkien. He was very good.
Yeah, he wasn't stupid.
No, he was not.
No. Well, We would like to close on a different topic. Earlier this year, we, along with all of the Tolkien community, really mourned the passing of Christopher Tolkien. A few weeks ago, we were fortunate to speak with John Garth, and one of the things that we talked about was the unique debt and the unique appreciation that fans of J.R.R.'s work have for his son Christopher, certainly more than really any other writer's child who then, took over. Nothing like that compares to what Christopher has done.
No.
Would you mind saying a few words for us now about Christopher's legacy, both how you feel as a fan and a scholar yourself, and then the debt that Tolkien fans everywhere owe to him?
Oh, it's enormous. Well, for
Yeah.
one thing, what we were just talking about,
Mm-hmm.
the task, free will,
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
all of that enrichment of
Mm.
that crucial scene in The Lord of the Rings is due to Christopher Tolkien's
Yeah.
work. We wouldn't know
We would have never seen it. Yeah.
any of
No.
that
That's right.
if he had not labored for 20 years and more
Yeah.
to put it
Yeah.
together. Our
That's
debt to
absolutely right.
him is just incalculable.
Mm-hmm.
It
He has
really
given
is.
us so much.
Mm.
He has deepened our understanding. Well, he just gave us the whole story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I found online, and I treated myself by buying a very small, I think it's 5 pages, pamphlet
Mm.
that he wrote on the writing of The Silmarillion, the published volume.
Mm.
And it's very interesting, in which he
bet.
says, I thought I had this massive material. And at first I thought, well, I'll just settle down and go to it. And then I realized I can't, it's overwhelming. People would be
Yeah.
confused. How shall I do it? And he made the decision to try to carve
Mm.
a coherent arc of story
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
out of that mass of papers
Mm.
that could be published and that would make sense and that would
Mhm.
still not do violence to his father's work.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
When you think about the task he set himself,
Oh.
it's so daunting. You wonder,
Yeah.
how did he sleep at night?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He must have realized he was, looking at 50 years of work
Mm-hmm.
at a minimum.
I bet you he didn't try to look at it that way, because if he
No,
had,
probably not.
he would
Talk
have
about overwhelming.
he would have jumped off London Bridge.
Yeah. Yeah.
He just put his head down and started it at the beginning and plugged along and
He
did
sure
one
did.
book after another. After he published The Silmarillion,
Mm-hmm.
and it was, on the bestseller list for years and years
Right.
and years, and it also shows up more in secondhand bookstores
Yeah.
than any other book I've ever seen.
That's true. I see multiple copies of it.
Which means that people didn't know what they had and
Yeah.
and didn't treasure it.
Yeah.
And he said, I think it was a mistake, and he was right, but he was
Mhm.
wrong. It was a
Yeah.
mistake in that it gave the audience, its intended audience, a kind of false idea of what Tolkien's Silmarillion mythology was.
Mm-hmm.
And to that extent, it was a mistake. It starts with a very simple sentence. There was Eru,
The one.
who
Yeah.
in Arda is called Iluvatar.
Yeah.
And people immediately went back to Genesis and said, oh, it's biblical.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, and God said.
Mhm.
And what that was doing was removing the whole very carefully set up framework that Tolkien had devised around the story
Mhm.
of multiple narrators and tale tellers and scribes and transmitters and compilers of books, all the way down to Frodo and Sam.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So he had cushioned this mythology. He was, in a sense, saying to his prospective audience, "No, I'm not writing the Bible, you nit. This is an elvish story. This is how the
Right.
elves imagined this mythology might be." And that it makes so much more sense.
Yeah.
So he started with a character named Ariel, whom he then renamed Elfwina, Elfriend,
Right.
who sailed from what was to become England to Valinor and heard the stories and brought them back. Well, you've got a frame right there
Yep.
that justifies just about everything that is in Christopher's Silmarillion and a lot that he left out.
Yeah.
And when he saw the impression that that volume was creating in the minds of people who didn't know exactly what they were reading, he realized that he had to do it again and do it right. We were
12
talking
volumes
earlier
later.
about
12 volumes, yeah.
Arthur and the story of Arthur and the fact that maybe next time they'll get it right. And Christopher said to himself, I think, I have a chance to do it right.
Yeah.
And so he did. And first he did the Silmarillion, and then he published Unfinished Tales.
Yes.
And I asked him once, because I remember coming across Unfinished Tales in a university bookstore, and I never heard of it. There was no advance publicity for it, and there it was, Unfinished Tales of Middle-earth, J.R.R. Tolkien. I thought, where did that come from?
Right.
And of course, I promptly bought it and loved it. But I said to Christopher, did you do that on purpose? Did you send that out with no advance publicity to test the waters, to find out if there was a real audience? And he said, yes. And of course, there was an audience and people bought it. And that gave him the go-ahead then to start. But even then, I don't think he would have envisioned 12 volumes.
No. 12 very large volumes at that.
Each one gets bigger.
Right.
Yes, it does.
It's like Harry Potter. They kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger as they go along.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
But then you can see his extreme care.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
To say,
detail.
Okay, there's draft A and draft B and draft C, and here's how they're different. And this is the one I'm going to use, but please read the notes because there's a lot in draft A and draft C that you really need to know about. I remember his study and his desk at Les Sablons, just, a sea of papers.
Oh, I'm sure.
And boxes with manuscripts laid out. But he has given us what his father wanted to create.
Yeah.
And the last three are the great tales.
Right.
Yes.
The Children of Houghton, Beren and Luthien, and the Fall of Gondolin.
Right.
And there's a lovely symmetry in Christopher's work after he finished the 12 volumes of the history of Middle-earth in going back to those tales.
Yeah.
And so lovingly reconstructed them. They are kind of essays in what could have been.
Yes.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
he's very blunt about that. My father did not write a coherent, finished story ever.
No.
These are the pieces that I will put together. But he finished that, and within 2 years, he was dead.
Yeah.
So I think he did what he felt he had to do.
Wow. And
I
we
think
are
you're right.
eternally grateful to him for certain.
We are.
Oh man, there's just no calculating the debt we owe to him.
There absolutely
It is true.
isn't. You're right.
It is true. There were
So much of what we know about
Almost
Tolkien,
everything we
so
do.
much is due to him.
Yeah,
Yeah.
almost everything we do is because of what he gave us, and
That's true.
it's
We started with the Silmarillion, and
yeah, we did.
we would not have, for that exact reason.
We did.
We knew there were some challenges when doing so, but
Well, you tell me, how are your classes? If you did start with the Silmarillion and you're working your way through the whole thing, how's it going?
Well, one thing we learned is we probably did the Silmarillion too quickly. We weren't sure what our pace should be. We were so new to podcasting, and once we hit The Hobbit and we started to slow our pace down, then we hit The Lord of the Rings and we got to about 6 pages per 90-minute episode. And even that's probably a little quick. Certainly Corey Olsen thinks that's lightning speed. But
I think we're down to about 4 or 5 now, aren't we?
We're down to 4 or 5.
We're
we
taking
break
our time.
Farewell to Lorien into 3 sections, for instance.
Are you going to go back to the Silmarillion?
We would like to. That's our hope.
That's the plan, yeah.
Oh, I hope you do, yes.
Yeah. Sort of a full circle. Like, okay, now that we've gone, chronologically through, let's go back with all our knowledge that we've gained from doing this over the years. And let's look at the Silmarillion one more time. And obviously it just depends on how things go. But
I think really don't just focus so much on the finished Silmarillion. Bring in the expanded versions of the Great Tales more. Bring in Children of Húrin more. Bring in the Fall
which
of
we were able to do a little bit because the Children of Húrin existed, but we couldn't do that at the time for Beren and Luthien or for the Fall of Gondolin because they weren't in existence.
And
yet.
we brought in some stuff. We certainly brought in, we brought in the Tuor stuff.
Unfinished Tales all the time and History of Middle Earth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think it would be a lot of fun to go back and really dive into just the history of the story and how it developed, you know?
Yeah. And we would owe that to Christopher, of course.
Yeah. And as Dr. Flieger said, it all started with the sack of a city and going back to an early version of the Fall of Gondolin. I think that would be so great to do.
In 1917.
I know. So amazing. Wow. This has been a phenomenal conversation, Dr. Flieger.
So much
we
fun.
are so grateful for you having joined us. And as always, we're just glad to have you back on the show. And of course, we'd be happy to have you back anytime.
It has been a pleasure. Believe me, I've loved every minute of it. I thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. It means so much to us.
It does.
And folks listening, we want you to remember that the talk continues all night long at the Prancing Pony. We've always got lots of discussion happening in our social media spaces. At our common room on Facebook, you'll find comments, questions, corrections, and more on every episode, as well as updates from us throughout the week. Just look for the Prancing Pony Podcast on Facebook and click the like and follow buttons.
And don't forget our other common room over on Reddit. You can find great discussions there at r/PrancingPonyPod. And as always, you can find us on Twitter and on Instagram with the handle @PrancingPonyPod, so follow us wherever you happen to be. And if you like us, please consider sharing us on Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, anywhere that you happen to find Tolkien fans.
And if you really want to let the world know your feelings about us, give us a review on Apple Podcasts. The more reviews we have, the more visible our podcast is. That helps others find us and this great community of Tolkien fans we built together.
That's right. And if you would like access to exclusive content like postscripts, quarterly specials, PPP swag, and more, check out patreon.com/prancingponypod to find out how you can join the fellowship of the podcast. But folks, that's going to wrap it up for this episode of the Prancing Pony Podcast and for Season 4 of the show.
That's right, folks. Even Alan and I need a break once in a while. So we're going to be taking off until September, when we'll come back with our 5th season, starting with episode 179 and book 3 of The Lord of the Rings.
This has been a truly amazing season, and we are so grateful for each and every one of you. When we wrapped our 3rd season, we had about 5,000 listeners. Now there are more around 8,000 of you out there. The community around this show just continues to grow, and we know that has as much, if not more, to do with all of you as it does with the two of us. So thank you. And remember, while we're off, we will still be around on social media. Bardaman will still, on occasion, be bringing us the mail. And most importantly, of course, we will still be working on getting ready for the new season.
That's right. We'll be road mapping the chapters, reaching out to guests, scheduling, and some other boring stuff. And if we're lucky, we'll do a little work on some new merchandise designs. Now, if you have any questions during our hiatus, just let us know on social media or by emailing Barlaman at theprancingponypodcast.com.
And like I said earlier, folks, we want to thank each of you listening. But we also want to give a very special thank you to our patrons at the Kierdance contribution tier. There are a couple of new names tonight. We'll start with James in Virginia, Tamsin in Minnesota, Chad in Texas, Lance in New Jersey, Paul in Colorado, Jerry in Texas, Bruce in California, Mario in Utah, Seth in Texas, Ella in California, Joseph in Texas, Kathy in North Carolina, and Lori from Washington. Thank you all so very much.
And make sure you don't miss a single episode of the Prancing Pony Podcast. Subscribe to the show through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app.
And one last thing as always, don't forget to send your thoughts, comments, and most of all, what you're doing over your PPP summer hiatus to barliman@theprancingponypodcast.com.
Now we have to admit, Barliman has gotten a little bit better with the mail these days, but I still wouldn't call him quick. So we'll get back to you as soon as we can, and your question or comment may be featured on an upcoming show.
Well, folks, this episode and this season has been far too short a time to spend among such excellent and admirable listeners. But until next time.
Farewell, friends.